Hello, everybody. Oh, can you let everybody in here? Okay, I think we're just letting people into the house here. Will you let them just come in?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Sorry about this, everyone. We're just doing. Here we go. Everybody's popping up now. Hi, all.
Hi.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Education Angels webinar on behaviour guidance. And today we're discussing why children demonstrate behavioural challenges. I'm just going to share my screen. What we'll do is we will. Can you see my screen? Sorry, before we get started. Do you want to see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
So we will. I'll pause at certain times for everybody to ask questions because I can't always see your faces or the chat whilst I'm sharing my screen. So I will stop at certain points and we have the opportunity then for people to ask questions on the topics I'm discussing, because I really like these to be interactive. And if there's any questions we can't ask on this call, then we're having a session 2 on behaviour guidance next month. So we'll make sure we cover it off on that session or our Q&A session in 2 weeks. So here we go. Okay, I think you muted me, Marcia, by mistake. So what we'll cover today is the following 3 things. About the developing brain. So behaviour is communication, and most behaviour challenges are simply a normal part of child development. So we'll talk about that. We'll discuss rewards and punishments and why they don't support positive behaviour, and also what to do instead. And then we'll talk about positive behaviour guidance and how to guide your child's behaviour in a positive way so that they take responsibility for their own actions. So does that sound all good?
Sounds perfect.
So the most important thing to remember is that the early years last forever, and that we are providing everybody with a free resource book from the Brainwave Trust, and there's a lot of information in there about brain development. But the whole principle of the conversation today is that we have our children underage, really, but particularly under 5s. Their brain is developing so fast, and all the neural networks and connections that they make in this stage of their life actually can affect the rest of their life. So if you ever doubted it, I can tell you that we do the most important job in the world, because we're growing brains of the future generations. So it is a fact that early childhood experiences have a big impact on how our brain develops. And as such, like I say, this can impact the rest of our lives. Fact 2 is that our genes form the blueprint of the brain, and brain development, but the way these genes are expressed are formed by our experiences, particularly our early childhood experiences. And then last fact for this slide is that secure attachments with responsive adults supports babies' growing brains and provides a real working model for future relationships. And that's pretty mind-blowing to think that things that happen and how we nurture our children can actually have an effect on how they can form relationships in their adult years. So first, to understand how early childhood shaped the behaviour of adults, let's just have a quick look at how the brain works. And I'm no neuroscientist, so this is a very simplistic view of it, so you just get an idea of why it's so important. So we have 3 parts to the brain. well, we have many parts, but the three parts that we're considering in the context of behaviors are the brainstem, which is responsible for basic life functions. So, all those things that happen that we don't think about, like breathing, and all our bodily functions. So, the brainstem is responsible for all of those, and they're unconscious. And then we have the limbic system, which includes the amygdala and the hippocampus, and they're responsible for our emotional responses and also the hippocampus for memory. And we all know that if you have an emotional experience, it's much easier to remember if there's no than it is if there's no emotion attached to an experience. So the memories that are very vivid in our mind tend to be those that have a high emotional charge. And I'll show you why in a minute. And then there's the prefrontal cortex here, which is the most recently evolved part of the brain and the last to develop. And that part of the brain is responsible for making decisions and problem solving. And the interesting thing is the brain grows from the inside out. So the first part of the brain to develop is the brain stem. And that makes sense because that's the part that's responsible for keeping us alive. And then comes it goes from the inside outside. So the prefrontal cortex obviously then would be the last part to develop. And because the higher brain of a child is still developing, in fact, until our 20s, they experience the world more through their lower emotional brain. And, as this says, you only have to observe babies and toddlers not getting what they want to understand this. But I bet you many of you know adults who feel this way when they don't get what they want as well. So our survival functions take over the higher brain in times of perceived danger. And the interesting thing is the brain cannot tell the difference between a physical threat and an emotional threat, which is why children and adults can often have meltdowns or feel real stress and anxiety when they're under emotional stress. And what happens is when we are under emotional stress, the amygdala here, this red box where the arrow that's pointing to the amygdala releases stress hormones, and it actually concentrates all our energy on the lower survival brain and cuts off the higher thinking brain. And you'll have all experienced this when something happens. You might witness a terrible accident or something, and you respond without even thinking, and you're not aware of what you're doing necessarily until afterwards. Or if you're involved in an accident, often it doesn't seem as bad when it initially happens. It's only afterwards, when you think about it, you realize how awful the situation was, because you just automatically respond and react without your higher brain thinking too much about it. But the same happens with temper tantrums and toddlers losing control, or adults. What's happening there is we are experiencing the fight, flight, or freeze response. And that's a fear response. So it's perfectly natural when we're feeling a high level of physical or emotional stress. And like I say, the brain can't always tell the difference between real danger or perceived danger. So that's why I love this here. Fear means false expectations appearing real. So we can have a fear response to something that's not really an absolutely dangerous situation. And there's a great quote by Leslie Hart here. The learning kids are now expected to accomplish occurs mainly in the neocortex. That was this higher brain I was talking about before. And yet the neocortex is the first part of the brain to shut down when a child feels threatened. So, and you'll have experienced this again, like when a tantrum is such a great example of an amygdala hijack. You'll have experienced this when, if you've seen a toddler throw a tantrum and you're trying to talk to them, or you're given an instruction, you might even be shouting at them. I know many people do, and I have in the past before I knew what I knew now. And they just can't hear you. They can't hear you because they're not capable of processing the information. because the higher brain, the thinking brain, has shut off. And the interesting thing too is that every experience that we have in our life, whether we're aware of it or not, is actually an emotional experience. And obviously there's a scale. It can be a very mild one, or it can be an extreme emotional reaction. But every single experience is involving our emotions. So we experience the whole of our lives through our emotions. And this is why. So this is a great picture of the brain, don't you think? So we talked before about the brainstem being right at the base of the brain, and down here comes the spinal cord, and that looks after the automatic body systems. And then we have the limbic system, and that's about regulation of emotions and motivation. Curiosity and the drive to do things is very much controlled by the limbic system of the brain. And then we have the higher brain that we were talking about before at the very top, which includes the right brain, which is all about feelings, images, intuition, and impressions. You know, it's a very creative part of the brain. And then we have the left brain. These are all part of the higher brain, which is the thinking brain. It's more logical. It's more about words, sequences, facts, the more logical side of the brain. Now, you'll often hear the term that somebody is a very right brain thinker or somebody's very left brain thinker. And there is truth in that. There are people who are more logical and more analytical in the way they think. And there are people who are more creative in the way they think. However, there's nobody on this planet, no normal brain, that doesn't use both sides, both the left and the right side of the brain. So it's really, and I'll talk about the importance of left and right brain integration in a minute when we talk about emotions a bit more. But suffice to say that they both play a different part. But the interesting thing is that the brainstem and the limbic system, our brains kind of follow this arrow. So when we're processing information or when our brains are active, the information goes through the brainstem, the limbic system, through the right brain to the left brain. So it doesn't go up the middle, it goes through the right brain to the left brain. So everything is processed through our emotional system. Goes to the right brain first, which is a very feeling brain, and then the last step, and that's like, I don't know how long, but it's very fast. Oops, don't know what, sorry. But the reason I've put this as a diagram is to show you that how the emotions are part of every single decision we make. And sometimes we can be very reactive. With the right brain, right brain thinking is often making impulsive decisions, thinking really quickly. Whereas people who are more left brain tend to think twice. They tend to be more analytical. So it's a very different way of thinking. But we all use both sides of the brain. So please don't think I'm saying that we use one or the other. We don't. Both are critical to a healthy brain and healthy mind. So that example is to show that we cannot separate the emotions from the experience. And when we can't control our emotions, then we can't control our lives. So it's really, really important that we teach children how to control their emotions. And this is what the guidance approach to behaviour does. So, and it says here, our emotions are our guidance system for life, and they are responsible for all the major decisions we make in our lives as well. So if you think about it, falling in love, getting married or moving in with your partner, moving house, buying a pet, deciding to have children. Think of any big decision you've made in your life, getting a job, starting a business, it's all been very highly emotionally charged. So just before, I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment to give people the opportunity to ask questions. If you have any. Oh, somebody says they can hear a TV in the background. Sounds okay to me. Is that sorted now? Maybe speak up or type in chat. All sorted, great. So does anyone have any questions or comments? We all good? Okay, I'll carry on. Well, I'll try and carry on. Excuse me, sorry, I'm having a few technology challenges here. Bear with me 1 second. Sorry about this. Somebody said no questions, but they loved my brain diagram. That's funny. It was pretty good, wasn't it? My triangles and squares. I'm no artist, I can tell you that for sure. Okay, sorry about that. All right then, so we talked about the left and the right brain, and the right brain being the emotional brain and the left brain being more logical. Well, behaviour guidance is about teaching children to self-regulate, to control their emotions. And the term used for that is sort of left and right brain integration. So the right brain has the experience, it's very feeling, very emotional. The right brain has the experience, and remember, every experience is an emotional experience. Then the left brain, the more logical and analytical side of the brain, makes sense of that experience. So you may have heard of the term in teaching children emotional literacy, the term name them to tame them. So when we're having strong emotions, it's really important that we teach children the language of emotions, so that when they are feeling a strong emotion, they can then express themselves, they can communicate how they're feeling to the caring adult. And the very process of engaging the left brain automatically starts to calm the emotional brain. So it's a really great strategy, but it's a great way. Teaching emotional intelligence and emotional literacy is a great tool, a great strategy for preventing behavioral challenges. And many of you will have experienced this in your profession or as parents, that children who don't have language, who struggle with verbal communication, will often lash out. There'll often be children, and most children do this at some stage in their life, but for children who don't have language, they're more likely to be biters, or they're more likely to be hitting out at other children, and that's, or adults. And that's because they have this strong emotion and they really can't explain what's wrong with them, and so can't get somebody else to understand what they're trying to communicate or convey. And therefore the amygdala then kicks in, the stress hormones, and the child will lash out. And it's like a fear response. They're not being naughty, they're lashing out because they're frightened, because they're feeling unsafe, and they don't know how else to communicate that feeling. So the behavior guidance approach empowers children to make good choices. We want our children to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because we're going to deliver a consequence if they don't do what we want them to do. So common behavioral consequences are, and these, you'll recognize all of these, I know. So common rewards are sticker charts, which is a form of bribery. Praise as a reward. And this is something I have to watch myself with as well. You know, that whole good girl or good boy or well done, you know, all those, all that praise we tend to lavish on children. believing we're doing the right thing. Now, I'm not saying we should never, ever praise children. But a good rule of thumb is if you wouldn't say it to an adult in that way, then let's not say it to a child. Children are really smart and they know if they're being manipulated or coerced. And you want praise when it is delivered to be meaningful. It should not be used as a reward or as a punishment. And I'll explain how that works in a minute. Treats is another reward, or promises of something. Like if you do this, then we can watch a movie tonight. Or if you're good in daycare, then you can have sweets when you get home, or lollies, I should say. So I'm sure everybody's heard of those forms of praise or even used them. I know I have. So, and special privileges, giving one child a privilege over another. Or even if it's an only child, again, it could be like being able to stay up later or watch a movie because they've been good. Punishments, I mean, we don't use smacking anymore, thank heavens, but banning treats is a common punishment. Time out, threats, the threat of not having the special privilege, or a threat if you're not good today, then we can't have your friends round, or we all know what threats sound like. And telling off, shouting at children, it's a form of punishment too. And the removal of toys or privileges, or not allowing them to participate in a favourite activity. These are all very common types of rewards and punishments that we see all the time, all around us, and I'm sure you have too, or do, I should say. So rewards and punishment are controlling forms of behaviour management, because we're using our power to control the child's actions. And why do we control? And as we say here on the slide, most of us control out of fear that we'll lose control, which sounds crazy, but it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? If I don't control this child, then this child is going to go and run havoc and, not be a sociable person and not be liked by other people. So it all comes from a good place, but it's still a fear on our part. Does that make sense? All good? A really good book, and I've put this here to remind me actually, a really good book on this is a book by Alfie Kohn called Punished by Rewards. So I recommend that anybody, I don't have a copy here to show you, sorry, but I'd recommend any of you to read that book. It's amazing. Okay, so controlling forms of behaviour management do appear to work, and that's why we use them. That's why it's so popular, so common, and a part of everyday society, is because they appear to work in the short term because we get immediate results. And if you say to a child, because again, children are so smart, if you say, do this and I'll give you lollies, then they're going to do as they're told because they want the lollies.
Angela?
Yeah?
There's just
screen,
a number
please.
of comments that we can't see the slides.
Oh no, I am so sorry, guys. Sorry, because that's why I say I can't see chat, guys. So Marcia and whoever. So I need you to tell me, because once I'm sharing, I can't see. I am so sorry about that. I don't know where. What a shame. Okay, so is there anything I need to cover again? Or are we all good?
Well, I think it's all good.
Okay, thanks. Is that Jeff? Thanks, Jeff.
No worries.
And thanks for alerting me. Okay. So, oh gosh. Sorry about this. I'm going to have to go. Not ideal, but just be patient. Sorry. Just because on some slides there's a lot of information, and I don't want it to be okay. too stimulating. So controlling forms of behaviour management appear to work in the short term because we do get immediate results, and children are really, really smart. So, and they soon learn to behave if we're threatening them with a treat or bribing them with a treat or promising them a treat. It's all the same thing. Children will behave at least while you're monitoring the situation in order to get the treat. So you can see that in doing that, we're putting the child's focus on the adult holding the power and offering the reward. The child is not doing what we want them to do because it's the right thing to do. They're doing it because they want the reward or they want to avoid the punishment. And either way, it's the same outcome. So long term, even though praise and threats or punishments seem to work, in the long term they don't work, because whilst we're controlling the behavior, we're losing the opportunity to teach. And that's because our aim in controlling children is for compliance and obedience. And that's not necessarily a good thing to teach children. Yes, we want them to be respectful members of society, but we don't want them to be compliant and obedient to any other adult. That can actually put children at risk. It disempowers the child as well, because the adult has control over the child, which is disempowering for the child. And it teaches children that mistakes shouldn't happen, that if they make a mistake, they would be punished. Because in teaching and learning, there's no difference between a mistake made in learning to tie our shoelaces or a behavioural mistake. It's still children in learning to manage and control their emotions and manage their behaviour are still learning. And remember, their higher brain has not yet sufficiently developed for them to necessarily have that whole left-right brain integration happening. Does that make sense? Yeah. And it puts adults as the boss with coercive power. So it's not necessarily good for relationships with your children either. And this is where you'll see a lot of children will, there'll be a battle of wills. That's a common term used. So a lot of children will resist the fact that you're holding this power over them, and there'll become a whole battle of wills, and the child will become defiant and non-compliant and disobedient. All these things that we don't want to be teaching, we're actually teaching them by being controlling. So the guidance approach, on the other hand, trusts that children are rational and trusts that children want to cooperate with us and to surprise us and to have us feel proud of them. And children do want adults to please adults. They do want to, they do look for our approval. It's just a natural way of being. So I think we need to trust that a lot more for our children. And so the guidance approach views children as competent. And we always say this in early childhood, we need to view children as competent, capable learners. And there's no difference between them being competent, capable learners, learning about their emotions and their behaviors, as learning about anything else. So we must expect behavioral mistakes that are a normal part of early childhood. The guidance approach focuses on meeting the children's current needs. It teaches children that it's okay to make mistakes, and we want them to know it's okay to make mistakes because that's how we learn. And it puts the adult as the leader, and the adult has a protective power, which is very different to having a coercive power over the child. So, and the guidance approach teaches children to take responsibility for their own actions, which is essentially what we want to do. We want them to grow up as responsible adults. So we need them to take responsibility for their own actions, and the guidance approach does that. So does anybody have any questions or comments to make? Is there anything that's challenged you so far in what we've talked about? I'll stop sharing so I can see chat. Cool. No questions? Good. Okay, cool. So
I have a question, Angie.
yes.
How soon could you teach
Angela, I
them
wanted to ask you something. I
Yes.
have a child who, he's 3.5,
Yeah.
and he screams, and we try our level best to talk to him, but I'm able to connect with what you're trying to tell me, but I somehow, I mean, like, I am in connect. I mean, like, I am in relationship with a parent where we are sharing our views on how we can help the child to control his emotions. But at times it becomes really difficult for us to really understand his needs. Though what you said that because the higher brain cuts off and he takes time to understand, it's later on when we talk to him,
Yes.
give him space, then he comes back and he says sorry or whatever. He just starts talking and listens to us. But
Yeah.
at that time, that when he's screaming, it is really hard to understand him, and I don't know how to approach this child. So I mean, like, if you can help me in understanding how we can proceed with that, that'll
Yeah.
be a great help. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, I mean, without knowing or observing the situation or knowing what led up to it, it's hard to say. But if he's lost control, then the best thing you can do in that moment is to be a safe and nurturing adult. So to reassure him that it's okay and calm him down, because anything you try and teach him when he's in that state is not going to get through anyway. So it's not worth, and it sounds like he's incredibly frustrated because
Yeah.
he wants to, he's trying to communicate something or he wants something, it could be. And what's his language like?
Sorry.
What's his language like?
It's English. It's English. He's a Kiwi.
No, I mean, sorry, not, what's his language? Can he verbalize his needs?
No, no, he can speak very well. He
Yes.
can converse because he's 3.5. He is able to express and tell us what he needs. But it's just that earlier we used to think maybe it is just because somebody tries to. Yeah, that is definitely there. When he gets annoyed, he is very difficult to handle.
Yeah.
And that parents also feel that if he wants something, he expresses it through his screams.
Okay,
Uh,
so
mm,
we'll cover more on this on the next video, but well, the next webinar. But there's certainly two potential things here. So one is to have clear and consistent boundaries,
okay.
because the world, children have to learn that they can't always have what they want when they want it. But there has to be consistency with that. Sometimes, if there's a lack of consistency, children will try and explore many ways to get their own way. Screaming could be one of them. It could be that he's learned if he screams, he gets his own way. Or it could be that when he's screaming, it's because he's lost control. And you'll know best because you know him.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if he's lost control, then the kindest thing to do is to be really supportive and calm in your tone and just give him time to calm down. Stay close to him. If he'll allow you, put your hands out. And if you want a hug, then let him have a hug. Don't give in to him, but just calm the emotion first. And then afterwards, once he's calm, then you can talk about what happened and how it could be that he wanted something he couldn't have. Well, he still can't have it. Just because he screamed and he lost control doesn't mean he can get his own way. But it could also be that something happened to him and his automatic response is to go to the the amygdala hijack, in which case you've just got to ride that and allow him to calm before you can even talk to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
it will be a phase as he learns to, and give him the language as well as a strategy. Teach him emotional literacy. So, you know, sometimes using emotion cards can really support to help him to name his feelings. So if he's feeling frustrated, if he's feeling tired, if he's feeling angry, if he's feeling sad, and teaching him more appropriate ways to express how he's feeling. It could be that he doesn't feel heard or acknowledged. It could be that, absolutely. Yeah. And that it could be from a past experience. Yeah, you're right, Estella. You know, it could be that something's happened to him before and he's learned that, you know, if he's lost control, it could be a fear response from a previous experience. So it's about being calm, nurturing, supportive, and actually when they get to that, when children get to that stage, it's very, very frightening. So, because then the emotions are so powerful, and you think that the higher brain is not sufficiently developed to make sense of it, it can be really, really scary. And some children really, really struggle with it. So, the best thing you can do is just calm it and, you know, offer a hug or stay close by and use a calming tone, etc., etc. But we will talk more on the next webinar too about boundaries and, you know, what to do when you get head to head with children and when tantrums happen. So definitely join the next one as well. But try that over the next few days and see how you get on.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So who else does it, Sam?
I have a question, Angie.
Yeah.
So, my 9-year-old boy screams a lot, and I was just wondering if he screams whenever he is frustrated and he's angry. And I was just wondering if the same thing, if what you said earlier also applies the same way to younger children.
I mean, if he's screaming out of frustration, it's actually a good outlet to go and have a good scream. You know, maybe he's 9 now, so maybe you could teach him um, just appropriate times and places on when to do it. But it's a really good thing to release that energy if he's really frustrated. But if he's screaming at people or in people's faces, then that wouldn't be appropriate. So you'd want to be talking to him about that. But he's old enough to reason now. To learn that that's not acceptable, and he'll learn it from either you or from his friends. So either way, he'll definitely learn that. But you know, sometimes we can be too. I think it's really good for children to have an outlet for their emotions. So you know, if we're feeling really frustrated, it's best to go outside or to a safe space and scream and release that energy than it is to hold it inside and express itself in other ways.
True. Yeah, we let him let out all his frustration, and then afterwards he tends to calm down. But are there any coping strategies that or tips that you can share to help us parents when we're dealing with this kind of emotions?
Yeah, not sweat the small stuff. Very often when things happen with our children, we get really upset by it and take it on as our own stuff and become, because we're so emotionally attached to our children and we really want the best for them, sometimes we can stress over things that most things are a phase, and it becomes a memory in such a short space of time as children develop better coping strategies for dealing with frustration. Definitely emotional literacy and acknowledging how children feel is critical to raising self-aware, emotionally intelligent children. So, you know, if you're talking to him and you're saying, I can see, it seems that you're frustrated, or it seems that, you know, am I right? Don't assume he's feeling a certain way, but just give him language. And you're probably already doing this. It sounds like you know he's he's pretty smart. So, but the more language we can give to children for them to be able to express their emotions, the better.
Thank you, Angie.
You're welcome. Okay, shall we jump back in? There'll be more opportunities for questions and discussion as well. I'm sure some of you will have lots of things to contribute. Just bear with me a second. I'm going back to my slideshow. Well, I am if I can get if I will find my Zoom. Oh, here we go. I seem to be having problems with Zoom here. All right, try again. Don't know whether this is working. Can you see?
Yes, you can.
Ah, cool. Okay. So there is a leadership strategy that I'm sure many of you have seen. Many business coaches teach this, and the work of Steve Narcovi and other leadership strategies and theorists is above and below the line. Has anybody seen this before? This is a great thing, Sam, for you to teach your 9-year-old as well. A good thing to teach children early, and to remember for ourselves as well. So above and below the line is essentially an empowerment strategy. So below the line is when we're feeling really disempowered and we feel victimized and we feel like life's not really going too well for us. You know, those days where you get out of bed late and then you stub your toe on the bed, you spill your coffee, you're late for work because you hit traffic, and it seems like once one thing goes wrong, everything else seems to go wrong after that. One of those kind of days or moments. And above the line is where we feel, you know, when you feel like you can take on the world and anything's possible and you're really motivated, you're feeling good about yourself. That's the victor feeling, the above the line kind of positive thinking, feeling really good. The way to ensure that we spend more time above the line in that feel good space, feeling empowered and good about ourselves, than we do feeling disempowered, is to teach our children, or even indeed for ourselves, is to take ownership, accountability, and responsibility. And this is a fantastic behavior guidance tool as well as a leadership tool. So, and if we look at behavior guidance strategies, what does it look like to give children ownership? Well, it's about them, you know, owning their behavior, owning their emotions or their state, and taking responsibility for their responses or reactions. Now, it doesn't mean we're telling them off, but for every action, there's a reaction. And it's really important that children learn this young, and holding them accountable as well. So if a good example would be if the rules are that we eat our dinner at the dinner table, then we provide consistent boundaries and expectations around having our dinner at the dinner table. So we want to teach our children to own that as their own and to be responsible. So if that's the rule of the house, then you should never break that rule. And children will, if you're consistent, they'll do that without questioning. But the minute you break that, or if you break that in, you know, if you decide some nights that actually it's okay, we don't need to bother having dinner at the dinner table, then what will happen is your child or the young person will then explore. They'll think, well, how come I thought that was a rule and now we're not doing it? And tonight I don't know whether I should be doing it or shouldn't be doing it. And what happens tomorrow? So they lose all certainty, and that threatens their sense of security. So what will happen then is they'll start to explore, well, do I have to have dinner at the table in daddy's house or with daddy, or is it just with mummy? And then you'll start to see defiance, what looks like defiance. But it's actually children just pushing the boundaries, exploring how far they can push you before you say, actually, no, this is what we do. And you keep that rule in place that we have dinner at the dinner table. Excuse me. That's the best example I can think of at the moment, but I'm sure you can think of many. If a child breaks a toy, then they need to take responsibility for that fact that they've broken one of their toys, and yes, we can do our best to fix it, but the fact that it's broken, it's not worth throwing a tantrum about it. It might be upsetting, and we'll acknowledge the feelings, of course, and support them through the emotional upset of that happening. But it's a fact that they're taking responsibility and ownership for the fact that that happened. And it's a hard thing to learn for some children. Another way of doing that is giving them choices. So a good way to stop children being, again, defiant or refusing to do as they're told is to say, would you like this one or this one? You're not saying, do you want to put your shoes on, for example? You're saying, do you want to wear these shoes or those shoes? And very often they'll just pick a pair of shoes and not fight about putting shoes on. So it's really, really important that where possible, we give children the opportunity to take responsibility, because we're teaching them responsibility. So you'll do that by giving them as many choices as you can throughout the day. So look for opportunities to give choices. It slows things down a little bit in your day, but it pays off in dividends, because the children feel empowered, they feel good about themselves, they've made a positive choice, and you're teaching them to make choices. And if they make a choice, then they've made that choice. So, if they choose to wear one pair of shoes, and you're outside and you're getting in the car and they decide they don't want to wear them anymore, well, it's not that good to go back in and change them again. You can choose to, but then you're not teaching them to be accountable for their choices. So, and that's an important part of learning to make choices, is the fact that they're accountable for the choice they make. And it's much easier to learn that when you're young than when you're making bigger choices. Yeah. So, and equally, it's we often victimize children and victimize ourselves as well. And you'll know when you're feeling below the line, because it feels very heavy, it feels disempowering, and it's not a nice energy. So it's not okay to blame or to make excuses, which is similar to blame, or even to deny. So often when children tell lies about doing something, it's out of fear. It's because we're being too controlling. So if you have a child who's always telling lies, then just think about your behavior guidance strategies. Is it a very controlling environment? Because lying is actually normally a fear response, and it's a fear response. I'm not saying as in an amygdala hijack, but it's a fear response as in they're thinking not about whether they're telling the truth or not. They're thinking about, how can I avoid that consequence? So therefore they'll say what you want to hear to avoid being told off, or to avoid not getting the lollies, or whatever the consequence might be. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So it's a widely held belief that we learn more from what we experience than what we're taught. And I think most of us would agree with that. So as someone said before, we really need to think about what kind of role model we're being for our children. Do they see us making up excuses for our behaviour? Or do they experience complete denial of a situation? Bribing doesn't work in the long term. I've just seen a note come up. It doesn't. Absolutely not. Do they see us blaming others when things go wrong? And what experiences are we providing for our children? So the best thing you can do if you make a behavioural mistake, and you will, every parent does, you get it wrong between, the interaction with your child, and you might be, I don't know, I'll use the example of you might shout, or you might get short-tempered, or, you might think, well, I probably shouldn't have done that in that situation. If you're a normal parent, you will have experienced that sometime. Well, do what you might do with an adult and adjust for that behavior, and say to your child, look, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have shouted, or I'm really sorry I did this, because you're being a really good role model, because you're demonstrating respect for your child, and you're also showing your child that it's okay to make behavioural mistakes, and that everybody does. Which is really, really important, because your child will make many, many behavioural mistakes. So, yeah. And remember too, that all behaviour is communication. It's an attempt to meet a physical or emotional need. So what is being communicated by that behaviour? That's right. And that's right, Lorraine, a child who lies will do so if they don't want to upset the adult or parent. Yeah. If they don't want to upset the parent, or also if they don't want to suffer the consequence of the bribe or threat or promise of reward. So I don't know whether you've heard of the author Stephen R. Covey. He wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he also wrote The 8th Habit. And he quotes the following statement, which is, first seek to understand and then seek to be understood. And that's a really, really important thing to learn as a parent too, or as an educator. So first seek to understand what's going on for that child. Have they completely lost it? Is it an amygdala hijack, or are they upset, or is it because they can't communicate what's happening? We often make assumptions about, and a classic example of this is when you see two children arguing over a toy, or when one child is really upset. And some children deserve an Oscar for their performance on this, but you'll see a child who's really, really upset because that child claims that another child hit them or took the toy off them or something like that. And very often the adults will go and reprimand the child who's been accused of that wrongdoing, because it's very natural for us to believe the child, or a child that's really, really upset, when in fact it's often the child that's most upset that was the instigator. So we have to be very, very careful to not jump in and make assumptions about what's happened when we haven't seen what's happened ourselves. And even if we do see it, the best thing we can do is allow the children to sort it out for themselves. Because if we want children to learn how to negotiate and to learn how to deal with unreasonable people, because in the adult world there are many unreasonable people as well. So it's better for children to learn how to cope with that and how to deal with those challenges when they're younger, and to know that they can actually look after themselves. And sometimes we can jump in and you can see one child take a toy off another child, and we'll think that's like not fair and it's unjust, and we'll want that child to give the toy back, when the child who had the toy in the first place probably isn't even bothered. So, again, we don't need to make a big deal. If the child's not bothered and both children are happy, it doesn't matter. They're not going to be stealing things off adults when they grow up. It's just they have not yet learned, particularly under 5, they've not yet learned that that's not the appropriate thing to do. And the best people to teach them are the children, and they'll soon let them know if they don't want that to happen. And again, the times to teach that or when we're teaching them to respect the environment, to respect other people, and about respectful interactions. And, you know, that's sometimes best taught by role modeling and by our own interactions with the children. And then that naturally will translate into the child's interactions with each other. And children, yeah, great chat here. Children are mirrors of us. I realise how I deal with things in challenging situations by looking at children in similar situations. Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny, isn't it, when you see your children playing with other children and you see yourself. It's really, really funny and quite cute. And we see in, you know, as early childhood teachers, we see some very amusing interactions between children. It gives you just a bit of a window into their life at home. It's really good, really good. So we can only expect a child to take responsibility for their actions if we give them the freedom to control their own behaviours. And this is what I was saying before, you know, sometimes we can jump in too soon and excuse me, we can jump in too soon and rescue children. And we don't really want to do that. And in rescuing children, we're victimizing them. So by allowing them to sort things out for themselves, we're actually giving them the opportunity to control their behaviors and also to stand up for themselves, to feel empowered and to know they have a voice. If we continue to rescue children, we're not building resilient children. And we really need children to be resilient, because in real life, things don't always go right. And there's not always going to be someone there to rescue us. So again, first seek to understand, could there be an emotional reason for that behavior or a physical reason for that behavior? So are they hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? There can be many, many reasons why children demonstrate challenging behaviours. So there are 4 main internal triggers for challenging behaviours. Oops, I wasn't going to let you see them, was I? I'm still not. One of them is exuberance. So that's normal childhood enthusiasm. And I think we can all be accused of this one sometimes. You know, you can be so excited and so exuberant about something, you can do something really silly. The second is exploration, which is natural curiosity. So sometimes exploration can look like children are being naughty, but they're not, they're just exploring. And again, like I said before, if you don't have consistent boundaries for children, then children are going to explore those boundaries and they're going to push every button until they get a reaction that looks like, this is where I draw the line. And that's just natural exploration. It's what children do. How else can they find out? Because they often don't have the language or the experience to be able to explain to you that, you know, this expectation has been inconsistent and I'm really confused. They don't. So they explore and they push boundaries. The third one is that children often don't know any better. So lack of experience. And again, the higher brain is not sufficiently developed for them to make sense of those experiences as well. So children can, you know, behave inappropriately just because they don't know. And as we know, loss of control. And loss of control is a fear response, and it often comes from a lack of understanding. So when we look at this, we can see that 25% of challenging behaviours is children just being children. So we really need to be aware of that. You know, we can't be punishing children for being children. We have to just not sweat the small stuff sometimes. And I'm not saying just let it be a free-for-all and ignore everything, but just allow children to sort things out for themselves where they can. Set clear and consistent boundaries in a really nurturing environment where the children feel loved and respected and accepted for who they are. And children most of the time will behave pretty well, very well, in fact. But when a behavioural mistake is made, it's best to teach rather than reprimand. So, and again, 75%, and this is huge, you know, when you think 25% of challenging behaviours are children being children, the other 75% is a reaction to us trying to control them, which is pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? And the way children react to us trying to control them is resistance, and we've all seen that. Get your shoes on, no. And, you know, it doesn't matter what you say or how often you say it. If a child is resisting you, they can carry on forevermore with that no, yes, no, no, no. Rebellion, that can be where they run away or they do something that you don't want them to do. You'll have all seen this where, you know, a child has not got their own way, or you won't do what they want you to do, and they'll go and throw something just to get a reaction. That's a typical rebellious act of a preschooler. Retaliation. So again, you know, hitting, pushing, kicking, and other forms of verbal retaliation. Escape. We've seen that too. So, you know, running away from you and hiding. But the worst one of all is submission. It's not disruptive, but it is detrimental to the child, both at the time of the behavior and throughout life. Because when children get to submission, they've given up. You know, I don't have a voice. It doesn't matter what I say. Nobody cares anyway. It's kind of that kind of feeling. And I'm sure most of you don't know children in this state, but it does happen. So has everybody seen some of this behaviour at some time and in some place? I'm sure for some of us, really. Yeah, and the key is giving them responsibility and guiding their emotions, teaching them that whole right left brain integration thing. So naming their emotions by, you know, they have the emotion in the right brain, then using emotional language to help them to name the emotions and understand them. But we should never try and do that until the child is calm and receptive, because they're not going to hear you anyway. But we will cover on our next webinar what to do in certain situations and a lot more in the way of strategies. So do we have any questions?
We have an interesting question from Carl earlier. He was asking about what about preteens or teens who chooses not to sort out their needs, not to sort out their friends' problems, or chooses to misbehave. Any tips on working with them?
I mean, I think with preteens and teens, I'm more knowledgeable about early childhood, but I think the same principles apply. So if we come here to this is great for early childhood behaviour guidance, but also adults and preteens and teens too. So, you know, if they have a responsibility, then they have to accept that responsibility and take ownership of it. Can you give me a bit more context? Because that might not be that helpful. And again, you know, if somebody's misbehaving, is it misbehaving, or is that they're not doing what we want them to do? That's a question, not a judgment, by the way. Because sometimes we have to accept that they are people in their own right. They're not an extension of us. And sometimes they might not want to do what we want them to do. And we can get upset by that. But at the same time, it's if your child can function in society, they can communicate themselves effectively, they can make friends, they can form relationships, they're respectful of other people, then you're pretty much doing a fantastic job, I would say, even if they don't always do what you want them to do. But clear boundaries are really, really important. And, you know, sometimes it's tough being the parent because you have to be unpopular in keeping those boundaries clear and set. But they do provide a sense of safety and security, even if they don't like it. So long as everybody's following the same rules, you know, it's not one rule for you and another rule for everybody else. Yeah. Oh, wow. This webinar is helpful. I work with youth for the youth offenders. I think my learnings can be very helpful in understanding their deviant behaviour. Yeah. And there are many, many different theories on whether children can overcome um, early childhood trauma. And I don't know enough about it. I'm not a psychologist, but it's really, really interesting. You know, some say they can, but at the same time, when we understand how the brain works, or at least our best thinking, the best of our knowledge right now, I think it's always challenging for children whose brains are wired for fight or flight. And I know this in my experience in early childhood. When we've had children from child, youth, and family, um, if we get them before 18 months into our setting, then we tend to see a massive transformation, positive transformation, fairly quickly with lots of love and affection and nurturing care. But I have noticed that once past 3, it takes a lot longer before we see positive results from different strategies. Yeah.
Angela, I just had a question going back to the choices. My 7-year-old daughter, I quite often give her choices, whether it be that we're out, you know, shopping for a new water bottle or something like that, and we narrow it down to 2.
Yes.
But then she can't make a decision, and she becomes so indecisive and just builds up all this anxiety about making a wrong decision. And what if?
Oh, bless her.
I've tried sometimes the filtering strategy. Well, do you want blue? Do you want red? Do you want this? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that can help her make her feel confident that she's made the right decision and it's not going to be the end of the world?
Well, would she love them anyway? Whichever one she chose, would she love it anyway? And it's still a water bottle. And, you know, even just saying to her, I think just in that case, acknowledging her feelings, and I know this is really hard, and we can either choose to pick one or we can go and come back another day when you've had more time to think about it. So, because it is hard, isn't it? I mean, I know when I've been choosing some big item or something that's cost a lot of money, and even I sometimes feel like that. You know, I hope I've made the right choice, and that's normal. So to explain to her that's really normal to feel that way, and you know, I know adults. You can say I know adults who feel that way sometimes too, but we can choose to choose one, or we can choose to go home. And it sounds a bit mean, but it's a great way of giving her the responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be the water bottle that we know this, of course. It's not going to be the water bottle for the rest of her life, but you know, that's like probably us going out to buy a car or something. It's a big, big deal for children making choices like that. So I think the important thing is acknowledging how she feels and explaining that it's quite normal. And if she doesn't want to choose right there and then, maybe she doesn't have to.
Cool. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. We have really interesting participants. We have Carl here and Karen. Karen works for youth with for young people who are youth offenders. We also have Carl, who is a high school teacher and was just wondering how he can approach disruptive behavior in his class more effectively, like refusing to do classwork or yelling in class. He finds that a lot of this webinar is helpful with younger children. So I was just wondering if we have some tips to share for all preteens.
So disruptive behaviours in class, so refusing classwork or yelling in class. I mean, again, is that because I'm more with early childhood, my expertise and experience is early childhood. I'm not as experienced with older children, although I had 3 sons of my own. But what does he get from yelling in class? Is it attention, or is he just being disruptive or rebellious? Or because you can tell that that's a reaction to being controlled. He doesn't want to be in class, full stop, does he? Clearly. And this is the challenging thing as well, that, yeah, it's really hard. How do you normally deal with it? Do you give him choices? Can he go and work in another room on his own where he's not disrupting other people? Because there has to be boundaries on respect, doesn't there? Respect for other people. But then I know resources in school are often really stretched, aren't they? So you might not have the teaching staff to separate or to remove him from being disruptive to other students. You know, can you ignore it? I mean, I would have thought ignoring it would be the best thing to do because there's no payoff. But you might be in a situation where that's not possible. I don't know. Yeah, you move him to a different class if needed. Yeah, I think a bit of everything is definitely the thing, but there's a payoff, and the payoff is probably that he's resisting and rebelling because he doesn't want to be there, and he's punishing you all for the fact that he has to be. And it's not an easy one for sure. Well, it could be all of that, Carolina. It could be, you know, there'll be many reasons. Carolina says he may be a teenager who was tired, or just, you know, there could be conflict at home and frustration, and there's probably a lot going on. But the thing is, that's disrespectful behaviour towards other people. So as far, you really need to, if you can, draw the line on it, and hormones too. Yeah, there's probably a lot of that going on for him. But ideally you don't want to subject other people to it. But if you can ignore it, it'd probably stop if you can, because there'd be no payoff. And does anyone else want to contribute to Carl's question too? Because I'm certainly no expert. I'm just here sharing my knowledge of early childhood. We've got really interesting people on the call. So, yeah. Yes, Adrienne says, with challenging behaviour in the classrooms, I give attention to the children that are choosing the appropriate behaviour and comment on the great work the others are doing. So ignoring the behaviour you don't want. Again, all about the relationship and building these with the child. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, ignoring won't work 100% of the time, but that's probably one of my go-to strategies.
I wonder whether it is maybe an attention seeking or a need for acceptance, looking to actually, get some acceptance from those peers, Carl. So,
yeah, could be. And, you know, we do this again. It's hard for me to not talk about early childhood because that's my field. But is there a way to give him responsibility for him to feel good about himself, and, you know, to switch the energy? So I don't know the situation. And again, ignoring it does, as Adrian says, ignoring often gets worse before it gets better. And can you talk to him? I mean, you'll have tried all of this, I know, to ask why he's doing it. Why are you doing that? Yeah. True. Good comments, guys. But if anybody else has advice for Carl, other than, you know, anything better than any more advice than we've just shared. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we are complex beings as humans, and so we all need a toolkit, because sometimes it does take a number of strategies. Oh yeah, the choice to work with another teacher. Yeah. Yeah, responsibility does sometimes work with disruptive children because, and as Leah says, if they have a controlling home environment, then children often feel lash out where they feel safe. That's why many of you in early childhood will see there's a few things that can happen, that your child's been in with your educator all day and really, really happy. And then the minute you walk in the door, they start to cry. They look at mum or dad and start to cry. And then you feel absolutely horrified that your child's crying when you come in the door. But often it's because they're so overwhelmed with the joy of seeing you that they don't know how to make sense or control that emotion. They just let it out in tears. They cry because it's overwhelming. But it's really, really interesting that happens. Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion? I used to be a high school teacher, and one of the things I did with the problematic kids, between brackets, they are not problematic, it was do a group dynamic called Revolution. And I used to put that kid in charge of the classroom, and all the other kids would do whatever he was doing. I mean, in the sense of disrupting, mimicking what he would do on a normal day. And he would feel what was going on, and he would have to be the one just calming down everybody else, stopping the one that was the one playing his role. It was a role play thing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's
and it was amazing. They would realize that it was okay. This is bigger than what I thought it was. And being in front of the classroom and being the responsible one, it's not as easy as it looks like, and how his behavior is affecting everybody else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because it is a lack of awareness, isn't it? That's what we want to do as far as possible, is teach respect. And to do that, you have to get to understanding first. So yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for that.
Yes, it's like mirroring their behavior.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, cool. Really good. Yeah, I'm just looking at the comments, guys. Yeah, you've had a couple of comments. That's interesting. All right, any other questions before I say a final word? Any comments for each other on what questions other people have had?
I think we are good.
Yes? All good? Okay, well, just before we go, I would like to just remind everybody that 25% of behavioural challenges are normal childhood behaviours. So just relax for that 25%, don't sweat the small stuff. And for the 75%, then just try and give children as many choices, get them to take ownership by having firm boundaries, and give them responsibility. Really good to always acknowledge children's feelings. So even if they don't like what you're telling them, and it's a rule that we don't throw toys, and you've had to, ask a child to stop throwing toys, for example, even if they don't like what you're telling them, it's really important that you keep those boundaries and expectations consistent as far as you possibly can. So yeah, have a wonderful few weeks ahead, and I look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, which is the 18th of February. We'll email you, same time, same place, and there we'll share more tips and strategies on how to deal with challenging behaviours. So we'll be looking specifically at particular behaviours, like the things we were talking about here, resistance, rebellion, retaliation, escape, submission, where children are withdrawn, what to do about those children, but also how to deal with temper tantrums, swearing, all these challenges we often face in early childhood. So I hope to see you there. And like I say, have a great month ahead. Thanks, everybody. Bye. So the link for the next webinar will be emailed out to you all. I've just seen a question.
We will be posting the registration link for the next session on our Facebook page as well. So please keep posted on our Facebook page. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you so much, everyone. Keep safe.
Thank you. Sam, I don't know how to do it, sorry.
No worries. We can actually end the meeting, so it would also end on Facebook Live.
All right, I shall do
Thank
that.
you, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye now.